Sarah Thompson stood at the entrance of Denver International Airport, checking her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The morning sun reflected off the airport's distinctive white peaks, casting long shadows across the departure terminal. At 35 years old, Sarah had mastered the art of business travel, but today was different. Her custom-made Valentino dress, carefully packed in a garment bag, represented more than just fashion. It was a statement piece for the upcoming charity gala in New York, where she would be speaking about diversity in corporate leadership. The dress had been a gift from her husband, Michael, who understood the importance of making a strong impression. Black silk fabric with intricate beadwork that had taken artisans weeks to complete. It was both elegant and meaningful. Sarah had specifically chosen it because a portion of its proceeds went to supporting minority-owned businesses. As she walked through the airport's sliding doors, Sarah felt the familiar rush of cool air conditioning against her face. She had done this routine hundreds of times before. Check-in, security, gate. Her TSA pre-check status usually meant a smooth process, and she had timed her arrival perfectly to allow for any small delays. The check-in counter was quiet, typical for a Tuesday morning. The airline staff recognized her. She was a Diamond member who flew this route frequently. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson." The attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Just New York today?" Sarah nodded, handing over her ID with practiced ease. Everything went smoothly until she reached the security checkpoint. The TSA pre-check lane, usually her fast track through security, had a sign posted, "System maintenance. Please use standard security lane." Sarah's heart sank a little. She had planned her morning schedule carefully, and this unexpected change meant possibly cutting things close. She joined the regular security line, standing behind a family with two small children and an elderly couple who were struggling to remove their shoes. Sarah pulled out her phone to send a quick text to Michael. "Pre-check down. Might be cutting it close. Love you." His response came almost immediately. "You've got plenty of time. Call me if you need anything." The line moved slowly. Sarah watched as other travelers went through their security routines, laptops out, shoes off, pockets emptied. She noticed how some people were waved through quickly while others were selected for additional screening. Her years of business travel had taught her to observe these patterns, though she rarely had to experience them herself. When she finally reached the front of the line, Sarah carefully placed her garment bag in a separate bin. "Excuse me," she called to the nearest TSA agent, a young woman with kind eyes. "This contains a delicate designer dress. Could you please make sure it's handled carefully?" The female agent nodded understanding, but her colleague, a male agent who had been watching the exchange, stepped forward with a different expression. The male agent, whose name tag read Morris, looked at Sarah with an expression she had seen too many times before, a mixture of authority and something else, something that made her stomach tighten slightly. He picked up her garment bag bin with deliberate slowness, examining the designer label with exaggerated interest. "Designer dress, huh?" His tone was just on the edge of professional, but Sarah could hear the undertone. "Well, we'll need to take a special look at this one. Can't be too careful these days." He emphasized special in a way that made several nearby passengers glance over uncomfortably. Sarah maintained her composure, drawing on years of experience handling difficult situations in corporate boardrooms. She stood straight, kept her expression neutral, and responded with calm professionalism. "Of course, I understand you need to do your job. I just ask that you handle it with appropriate care, as it's quite valuable." The growing line behind her shuffled impatiently. The family with children had made it through, and the elderly couple was collecting their belongings. But Morris seemed in no hurry. He gestured to the regular screening line instead of the metal detector she had been heading toward. "Right this way, ma'am," he said, the word ma'am carrying a weight that made it feel more like an insult than a courtesy. "We'll need to do a thorough inspection. Can't let anyone skip the proper procedures, no matter how important they might think they are." Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as she headed toward the indicated line. She had no way of knowing that this was just the beginning, that in the next few minutes, this routine airport security check would turn into something that would make headlines across the country and change multiple lives forever. TSA agent Kevin Morris was having what he considered a boring morning until Sarah Thompson walked up to his security checkpoint. In his 8 years working at Denver International Airport, he had developed what he called a sixth sense for passengers he could exercise his authority over. His coworkers had noticed this behavior, but most stayed quiet, not wanting to create workplace tension. As Morris led Sarah to the screening area, he could feel the eyes of other passengers on them. He liked this feeling, being the center of attention, having control. The designer garment bag in his hands represented everything he resented: success, wealth, and what he viewed as privilege. The fact that Sarah was a well-dressed black woman made him even more determined to assert his authority. "Stand here," he commanded, his voice unnecessarily loud. "Arms out to your sides." He watched as Sarah complied, her face maintaining a calm expression that somehow irritated him even more. The female TSA agent who had first spoken with Sarah, Agent Jenny Chen, moved forward as if to assist, but Morris waved her away. "I'll handle this one myself," he said, emphasizing each word. Jenny hesitated, then stepped back, her discomfort visible. She had seen Morris do this before, but something about today felt different. She quietly pulled out her phone and started typing a message to their supervisor. Sarah spoke up, her voice steady and professional. "Sir, I want to cooperate fully, but I need to inform you that the dress in that bag is a custom Valentino piece worth over $12,000. It requires careful handling due to the beadwork and delicate fabric." Morris lifted the garment bag roughly, letting it swing from side to side. "Oh, $12,000? Well, isn't that something?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "You know, we get all kinds of people claiming their items are special." He unzipped the bag with deliberate carelessness, making Sarah wince. A small crowd had begun to form. Some passengers were delayed in moving on, watching the scene unfold. A young man in a business suit had his phone partially raised, though he hadn't started recording yet. The tension in the air was palpable. "I need to check inside all these fancy seams," Morris announced, pulling at the dress's delicate fabric. "Could be hiding anything in here." His fingers pressed hard against the beadwork, causing several beads to pop loose and scatter across the floor. Sarah's calm facade cracked slightly. "Please be careful. That's completely unnecessary force." "Ma'am, are you telling me how to do my job?" Morris interrupted, his voice rising. "Because I can make this process much more thorough if you prefer." The threat in his tone was unmistakable. By now, Jenny had returned with their supervisor, Linda Martinez, but they were momentarily caught behind a group of passengers. Linda watched with growing concern as the situation escalated. "I'm simply asking you to handle my property with appropriate care," Sarah responded, her business training helping her maintain composure. "Your job is to ensure security, not to damage personal property." Morris's face reddened. He grabbed the dress more roughly, his fingers intentionally catching on the delicate silk. "Well, your attitude is making me think we need to do an extra special inspection. Maybe you're not used to following rules like everyone else." The racist undertone in his comment was clear to everyone within earshot. Several passengers gasped. The young man with the phone was now openly recording, and others had followed suit. Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor immediately. And I want your name and badge number." Morris laughed. A short, harsh sound. "It's right here on my badge, if you can read it." He tapped his chest with exaggerated movement. "And sure, call whoever you want. Call your supervisor, call your lawyer, call the president for all I care." As he spoke, his hands continued to roughly handle the dress, and suddenly there was a distinctive ripping sound. A long tear appeared along one of the seams, beads scattering across the floor like expensive rain. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, but before she could speak, Morris smirked and said, "Oops, guess it wasn't made as well as you thought. Maybe next time dress more appropriately for travel." Linda Martinez finally pushed through the crowd, her face set in a grim expression. But Sarah was already pulling out her phone, her fingers quickly dialing a number. What Morris didn't know, what would soon change everything, was that on the other end of that call was someone who could do far more than just file a complaint. The ripping sound echoed through the security area like a gunshot. Sarah Thompson stared in horror at her destroyed Valentino dress, watching as more beads rolled across the floor. The tear ran from the shoulder to the waist, destroying months of careful handwork in seconds. But it wasn't just about the dress anymore. It was about dignity. Linda Martinez, the TSA supervisor, finally reached the scene. "Agent Morris, step away from," she began, but Morris wasn't finished. He held up the dress, letting the torn piece dangle, making sure everyone could see what he'd done. "Well, looks like this fancy dress isn't airport appropriate after all," he announced loudly, playing to his audience. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about making such a fuss over nothing." His words carried a smugness that made several onlookers shake their heads in disgust. Sarah's phone was still in her hand, the call to her husband already connected. Michael Thompson's voice came through clearly. "Sarah? What's going on?" She held the phone closer, making sure it picked up every word of what was happening. "Sir," Sarah addressed Morris, her voice steady despite her anger, "you just deliberately damaged a $12,000 dress. I want to be very clear about what's happening here. You singled me out, made racist comments, and intentionally destroyed my property." The crowd had grown larger. At least a dozen phones were recording now, their cameras capturing every moment. Jenny Chen, the female TSA agent, had moved to stand beside Sarah, clearly distancing herself from Morris's actions. Morris's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Are you accusing me of something? Because I can tell you right now, nobody's going to believe." "Agent Morris." Linda Martinez's voice cut through his rant like a knife. "That's enough. Step away from the checkpoint immediately." But Morris wasn't done. He grabbed the dress again, this time with both hands. "Oh, you want to see intentional damage? I'll show you intentional." His hands gripped the fabric, ready to tear it further. "Stop." The command came from multiple voices: Linda, Jenny, and several passengers. But it was Sarah's quiet voice that somehow cut through the chaos. "My husband would like to speak with you," she said, holding out her phone. The calmness in her voice made Morris pause. He laughed, short and ugly. "Oh, your husband. What's he going to do? Buy me some fancy clothes, too." He made no move to take the phone, instead dropping the dress carelessly to the floor. More beads scattered, rolling under the security barrier. Linda Martinez stepped forward, her face tight with anger. "Morris, you are suspended effective immediately. Turn in your badge." "Suspended?" Morris scoffed. "For what? Doing my job? This woman comes in here with her attitude." "Your job?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Your job is to ensure airport security, not to harass passengers and destroy their property. Everything you've done in the last 10 minutes has been recorded, not just by these passengers, but by airport security cameras." Through the phone, Michael Thompson's voice could be heard clearly. "Sarah, don't move. I'm already on my way with the airport director and legal team." Morris rolled his eyes. "Oh sure, the airport director. Like you just have him on speed dial." He turned to Linda. "Are we really going to let these people throw around fake threats?" Linda Martinez's face had gone pale. Unlike Morris, she recognized the name Michael Thompson. As the majority stakeholder in the airport's management company, his name was on half the documents that crossed her desk. "Agent Morris," she said quietly, "I'd highly suggest you stop talking." But Morris was on a roll now, his anger and prejudice overwhelming his judgment. "What? You're taking her side now? Just because some rich lady can't handle a proper security check?" He kicked at the fallen dress, sending it sliding across the floor. "People like her think they're above the rules, but I'm here to tell you." He never finished his sentence. The airport director, James Wilson, had arrived with 2 security officers. Behind him strode Michael Thompson, his face a mask of controlled fury. Sarah finally let her tears fall, not from fear or sadness, but from anger and frustration. As her husband approached, she squared her shoulders and spoke clearly, making sure everyone could hear. "I want to press charges, all of them, and I want every second of security footage preserved." The gathered crowd broke into applause, while Morris finally began to realize that his small act of prejudiced power tripping was about to become the biggest mistake of his career. The security checkpoint area had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Airport Director James Wilson immediately cleared the space, asking waiting passengers to proceed to a different security line. But many people stayed behind, still recording with their phones. The videos were already spreading across social media like wildfire. Sarah Thompson knelt carefully to pick up her ruined dress from the floor, each scattered bead representing another piece of dignity Morris had tried to strip away. Her husband Michael stood beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. The contrast between his calm exterior and burning eyes told everyone that this incident was far from over. "Ma'am," Jenny Chen approached with a clear plastic bag. "Please let me help you collect the evidence." Her hands shook slightly as she began gathering the fallen beads. I should have stopped him sooner. I'm so sorry." Morris stood against the wall, his TSA badge now in Linda Martinez's hands. The smirk had finally fallen from his face as he watched airport security officers positioning themselves near him. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how a routine power trip had turned into this nightmare. "I want statements from everyone," Airport Director Wilson announced, his voice carrying authority. "Security footage from all angles, witness accounts, everything." He turned to the gathering of passengers who were still watching. "If any of you recorded this incident and are willing to share your videos, please stay. Your assistance would be greatly appreciated." At least 15 people stepped forward immediately. A college student spoke up. "I've been recording since he first started handling the dress roughly. I also caught those racist comments he made." Others nodded, confirming they had similar footage. Sarah had managed to collect herself, years of corporate experience helping her maintain composure. She pulled out her phone and began taking photos of the damage, documenting everything methodically. Michael watched her with pride and anger mixing on his face. Pride in her strength, anger at what she'd endured. "I want to make a statement," Sarah said clearly, looking directly at Morris. "This isn't just about a ruined dress. This is about abuse of power, racial profiling, and the kind of everyday discrimination that often goes unchallenged because people are afraid to speak up." Morris tried to interrupt. "Now wait just a minute." "Officer," Michael Thompson cut him off, addressing one of the security personnel. "Please ensure that this man doesn't leave the airport. We'll be filing formal charges." The videos were already gaining traction online. Sarah's assistant in New York called, saying that national news networks were reaching out for comment. What had started as one TSA agent's power trip was quickly becoming a national story about discrimination and accountability. Linda Martinez approached Sarah with a stack of forms. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to fill these out. It's our official incident report." She paused, then added quietly, "We've had complaints about Morris before, but never anything this severe or well documented." "Previous complaints?" Michael's voice was sharp, and he was still working here. Before Linda could respond, a new figure hurried into the area. Diane Roberts, the airport's chief legal counsel. She took one look at the scene and began issuing rapid instructions to her team. "I want every security camera angle downloaded and secured," she ordered. "Full backup copies. Start taking witness statements immediately. Mrs. Thompson, we'll need your detailed account of everything that happened." Morris, finally seeming to grasp the seriousness of his situation, spoke up again. "Look, maybe we can talk about this. I was just doing my job, making sure." "Your job?" Sarah turned to face him, her voice steady. "Let's be very clear about what your job is and isn't. Your job is to ensure airport security. Your job is not to discriminate, harass, or destroy property. Everything you did today was about power and prejudice, not security." The crowd of witnesses murmured in agreement. A older woman stepped forward, her phone still recording. "I fly through here twice a month," she said. "I've seen him do similar things before, just never this bad. It's time someone stood up to him." As airport security began taking official statements, Sarah's phone kept buzzing with notifications. The videos were going viral. Hashtag Denver Airport Discrimination was trending, and major news networks were picking up the story. What Morris hadn't realized when he decided to target Sarah Thompson was that his actions wouldn't just cost him his job. They were about to spark a national conversation about accountability in airport security and the ongoing reality of racial discrimination in America. Michael Thompson's arrival at the security checkpoint had caused a stir, but it was his next actions that truly demonstrated why Morris had picked the wrong person to harass. As the airport's majority stakeholder, Michael didn't just own shares. He had the power to make immediate changes. "Get me the last 6 months of security footage from every checkpoint Morris has worked," Michael instructed the team he brought with him. "Every complaint, every incident report, everything." His voice was calm, but carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed without question. The airport's executive director, James Wilson, was already reviewing footage from today's incident on a tablet. His face grew darker with each passing minute. "Mr. Thompson, this is completely unacceptable. I assure you, we'll conduct a thorough investigation." "James," Michael interrupted quietly, "this goes beyond one investigation." He looked around the security area where passengers were still giving statements. "This is about systematic failures. How long has this been happening? How many other travelers has he harassed who couldn't fight back?" Sarah stood nearby, speaking with Diane Roberts, the airport's legal counsel. She had changed from her traveling outfit into backup clothes from her carry-on, but her ruined Valentino dress lay carefully documented on a table, its tear a stark reminder of prejudice in action. "The social media response is overwhelming," Diane reported, scrolling through her phone. "The videos have millions of views already. Major news networks are asking for statements. This is going viral faster than anything I've seen." Just then, Jenny Chen approached with a thick folder. "Mrs. Thompson, I have something you need to see." Her hands shook slightly as she handed over the file. "These are copies of all the complaints against Officer Morris from the past year. I've been keeping them, just in case." Sarah opened the folder, and her expression hardened as she read. 15 separate incidents of alleged discrimination. All minorities. All dismissed without proper investigation. She passed the folder to her husband, whose jaw tightened visibly. Morris, still standing against the wall under security supervision, finally began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "Listen," he called out, his voice having lost its earlier arrogance. "This is all just a big misunderstanding. I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" Michael's voice cut through the air like a knife. He turned to face Morris directly. "Let's talk about protocol. I just got off the phone with the head of the TSA. Would you like to know what actual protocol is?" He began listing points on his fingers. 1. TSA agents must handle all passenger property with reasonable care. 2. Discrimination based on race, color, or any other factor is strictly prohibited. 3. Any damage to passenger property must be immediately reported and documented. Linda Martinez stepped forward with more paperwork. "Sir, we pulled Officer Morris's employment records. There's something else you should see." She handed Michael another file, this one containing performance reviews and incident reports. As Michael read, his expression grew even more serious. Multiple warnings about excessive force. Complaints about discriminatory behavior. All buried or dismissed. He looked up at the airport director. "James, we need to review every single case this man has handled." The revelation of Morris's past behavior had created a ripple effect. Other TSA agents began coming forward, sharing stories of incidents they'd witnessed but had been afraid to report. Passengers who had experienced similar treatment in the past started calling the airport, their stories adding to the growing evidence. Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. Opening it, she saw that national civil rights organizations were already reaching out, wanting to use this incident as a catalyst for broader change in airport security procedures. "You know what the saddest part is?" Sarah addressed the room, though her eyes were fixed on Morris. "This happens every day to people who don't have the resources or platform to fight back. People who have to swallow their dignity and stay quiet because they can't afford to miss their flight or fight a legal battle." Michael put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Well, that changes today." He turned to address the gathered airport officials. "I want a complete overhaul of security training procedures, new oversight committees, independent reviewers. This isn't just about punishing one person, it's about fixing a broken system." Morris slumped against the wall, the full weight of his actions finally hitting him. He had thought he was picking on just another traveler. Instead, he had triggered a chain of events that would reshape airport security protocols across the country. His small-minded act of discrimination was about to become a turning point in the fight against systemic racism in air travel. The security area had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Airport executives huddled around tablets showing security footage, while legal teams sorted through the growing pile of witness statements. At the center of it all stood Morris, his face now pale and sweating, as he watched his career crumble before his eyes. Michael Thompson stood at a temporary desk that had been set up, reviewing the security footage from multiple angles. Each screen showed a different view of Morris's actions, the rough handling of the dress, the threatening posture, the a clear targeting of Sarah. The footage was damning. Play that section again, Michael instructed the IT specialist. The part where he first approaches my wife. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the desk. On the screen, they watched as Morris deliberately ignored other passengers to single out Sarah. The racial profiling was obvious. The footage showed him waving through several white passengers with large bags while stopping Sarah for extra screening. Sarah approached her husband, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "The news vans are outside," she said quietly. "CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they're all here. This is bigger than us now." Morris, who had been standing silently under guard, suddenly found his voice again. "Mr. Thompson, please," he called out, his tone completely different from earlier. "I have a family to support. I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Michael cut him off, turning to face him. "You didn't know who we were, so you thought it was safe to discriminate. You thought Sarah was just another minority traveler you could harass without consequences." The airport director, James Wilson, stepped forward with a tablet showing more footage. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, we've compiled incidents from the past 3 months alone." He pressed play, and the screen showed a series of clips. Morris roughly handling a Hispanic woman's belongings, making an elderly Asian man remove his medical shoes unnecessarily, pulling apart a Muslim woman's hijab for inspection. Sarah watched the footage, her face growing more determined with each scene. "How many?" she asked. "How many people has he hurt like this?" Jenny Chen, who had been documenting everything, spoke up. "From what we've found so far, at least 50 documented incidents in the past year. But those are just the ones that were reported. Most people don't file complaints because they're afraid of missing their flights or facing retaliation." Morris began to panic as he saw his past actions displayed on screen. "Those were all legitimate security concerns," he protested. "I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Michael's voice was like ice. "Let me tell you about your job, Mr. Morris." He walked over to stand directly in front of the disgraced TSA agent. "Your job was to ensure airport security. Your job was to treat all passengers with respect and dignity. Your job was to protect people, not terrorize them." The gathered crowd watched in silence as Michael continued. "Instead, you used your position to bully and discriminate. You targeted people you thought couldn't fight back. You abused your authority to make yourself feel powerful by making others feel small." Airport security footage continued playing on the screens around them, showing incident after incident. Morris's face grew paler with each new revelation. His previous smirk was long gone, replaced by the look of a man watching his world collapse. Linda Martinez approached with more files. "Sir, we found evaluations from Morris's previous employment at another airport. He was terminated for similar behavior, but managed to hide it when applying here." "Terminated?" Morris sputtered. "That's not. Those records were sealed." "Not anymore," Michael replied grimly. "We're going to review every single complaint, every incident, every report, and this time there will be consequences." Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "What you did today wasn't just about a ruined dress. It was about power and prejudice. But you picked the wrong day and the wrong person to show your true colors." The airport's legal team had finished their preliminary review. Diane Roberts approached with a thick stack of papers. "We have enough evidence for multiple civil rights violations," she reported. "The security footage alone is conclusive." Morris slumped in his chair as reality finally hit him. His years of unchecked discrimination had caught up with him, and there would be no talking his way out this time. The power he had so casually abused had turned against him, and the woman he had tried to humiliate was now standing tall, ready to ensure he faced justice for not just her experience, but for every passenger he had ever mistreated. Over the next 2 weeks, Denver International Airport became the center of a national conversation about discrimination in airport security. A team of independent investigators took over one of the airport's conference rooms, turning it into a temporary command center for what had become known on social media as #TSA discrimination. Sarah Thompson's viral incident had opened floodgates. Hundreds of travelers began coming forward with their own stories of mistreatment at airports across the country. The investigation team, led by former civil rights attorney Marcus Rodriguez, worked tirelessly to document every case. "We've received over 300 credible reports just from Denver alone," Marcus explained during a meeting with the Thompsons. Spread across the conference table were photos, statements, and incident reports. What's most disturbing is the pattern. Morris specifically targeted minorities, women traveling alone, and elderly passengers. Jenny Chen had become a key witness. She sat at the end of the table, surrounded by files she had secretly kept over the past year. I started documenting everything after I saw him make an elderly Korean woman miss her flight to her grandson's wedding, she explained, her voice quiet but firm. He claimed her traditional medicine bottles needed special screening. They didn't. Michael Thompson stood at the window, looking out over the airport runways. How many other Morrises are out there? He wondered aloud. How many other airports have the same problem? The investigation had revealed a troubling system of cover-ups. Linda Martinez brought forward years of buried complaints that have been marked as resolved without any real investigation. The previous management had a policy of protecting their own, she explained. Complaints were often dismissed as misunderstandings or necessary security measures. Sarah had taken a leave from her corporate job to focus on the investigation. She spent hours interviewing victims, many of whom had never reported their experiences because they felt powerless. One woman told me she just accepted it as part of traveling while black. She shared with the investigation team. That's not acceptable. Not anymore. The airport's department had been working overtime, reviewing thousands of hours of security footage. They created a database of incidents, tracking patterns in Morris's behavior. The evidence was overwhelming. Look at these statistics. Marcus pointed to a chart. When Morris was on duty, minority travelers were 6 times more likely to be selected for random screening. Women traveling alone were 4 times more likely to have their bags searched. The numbers don't lie. The investigation also uncovered Morris's history at other airports. Before Denver, he had worked at 3 different airports in 2 states. Each time, complaints of discrimination had followed him, but he had always resigned before formal investigations could begin. He knew how to work the system, Linda explained. He would transfer or resign whenever too many complaints piled up, then apply somewhere new where his record wouldn't follow him. The nationwide attention brought by the case had sparked internal reviews at airports across the country. The TSA headquarters sent representatives to Denver to observe the investigation, realizing they needed to address what was becoming a public relations crisis. This isn't just about one bad agent, Michael told the TSA representatives during a meeting. This is about a system that allowed him to operate unchecked for years. We need structural changes. Sarah worked with civil rights organizations to develop new training programs. We're creating modules specifically focused on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity, she explained to the investigation team. Every TSA agent in the country will need to complete this training. The investigation also revealed positive stories. Other TSA agents began speaking up about colleagues who had stood up against discrimination. Jenny wasn't the only one who had been keeping records. Others had documented incidents but had been afraid to come forward. Change happens when good people find their courage, Sarah told a group of TSA agents who had volunteered to help with the investigation. What happened to me was terrible, but if it helps prevent others from experiencing the same treatment, then something good can come from it. As the investigation neared its 3rd week, the findings were clear. Morris's actions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern of systematic discrimination that had gone unchecked for too long. The question now wasn't just about punishing one agent, but about changing an entire system that had allowed such behavior to flourish in the first place. 1 month after the incident that sparked a national conversation, Sarah and Michael Thompson stood in the main conference room of Denver International Airport. The room was packed with reporters, airport officials, and civil rights leaders. On the screen behind them played a compilation of security footage showing Morris's years of discriminatory behavior. Today, we're not just announcing the results of our investigation, Sarah began, her voice strong and clear. We're announcing real change. She gestured to the group of people seated behind her, representatives from major airports across the country, TSA officials, and civil rights attorneys. The investigation had led to immediate consequences for Morris. He faced multiple civil rights violation charges and was permanently banned from working in any airport security position. But the Thompsons had pushed for something bigger than just one person's punishment. We're establishing the Air Travel Equality Foundation, Michael announced, unveiling the foundation's logo on the screen. With an initial funding of $50 million, this foundation will work to ensure that what happened to Sarah never happens to anyone else. The foundation had three main goals. First, it would provide legal support to travelers who experience discrimination at airports. Second, it would fund new training programs for airport security staff nationwide. Third, it would create an independent oversight committee to investigate complaints of discrimination. Jenny Chen, who had been promoted to head of security training, stepped forward to explain the new programs. Every TSA agent will now undergo mandatory cultural sensitivity training, she explained. We're also implementing a new system where agents regularly rotate positions to prevent any one person from abusing their power. The changes weren't just happening in Denver. Representatives from 20 major airports had signed agreements to implement the new training programs and oversight measures. The TSA headquarters had also announced major policy changes, including body cameras for agents and regular audits of screening statistics. Linda Martinez, now heading the Oversight Committee, shared the new reporting system. Passengers can now submit complaints through our mobile app, she demonstrated. Every complaint is tracked, investigated, and followed up on. No more buried reports, no more ignored voices. Sarah had turned her experience into a mission. She regularly spoke at airports and security conferences, sharing her story and advocating for change. The torn Valentino dress, now a symbol of the fight against discrimination, was displayed in a glass case at the foundation's headquarters. Sometimes positive change comes from difficult moments, Sarah told the gathered crowd. What happened to me was horrible, but it exposed a problem that had been hurting people for years. Now we're fixing it. The foundation's first month had already shown promising results. Complaints of discriminatory treatment at participating airports had dropped by 40%. The new training programs were receiving positive feedback from both passengers and security staff. We're not just changing rules, Michael explained. We're changing culture. Every traveler deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, gender, age, or appearance. The story had created ripples beyond airport security. Other transportation sectors were adopting similar oversight measures. Civil rights organizations were using the case as a model for fighting institutional discrimination in other areas. From her seat in the audience, Jenny smiled as she watched Sarah speak. The frightened passengers she used to see at Morris's checkpoint were now greeted by well-trained, professional agents who understood the importance of respectful treatment. The foundation will also provide scholarships, Sarah announced, for minorities interested in careers in airport security and aviation management. We need diversity at every level to prevent discrimination. As the presentation ended, reporters rushed forward with questions, but Sarah's attention was caught by an elderly woman in the back of the room. She recognized her from the security footage, one of Morris's previous victims. The woman approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the first time in years, I'm not afraid to fly anymore." That evening, as Sarah and Michael watched planes take off from their office window, they reflected on how one moment of standing up against injustice had sparked a movement for change. "We turned something ugly into something beautiful," Sarah said, squeezing her husband's hand. Michael nodded, watching another plane soar into the sunset. "And we're just getting started." The torn Valentino dress in its display case caught the last rays of sunlight, its damaged beadwork now a reminder not of discrimination, but of the power of standing up for what's right. Morris's attempt to humiliate one woman had instead empowered thousands to speak up and fight for change.